So I started the conference and you didn't have enough, you want to finish with me as well?
Yeah, we want to finish here.
Yeah, you want to finish at all. You don't care if it's with me or with anyone. So thanks for coming to this talk about object-oriented programming in the enterprise. It's not fancy, it's not hype, it's not about microservices, Docker, Kubernetes. It's just plain, simple stuff that I'm afraid is not understood by many. So I already introduced myself, so you know me. Just a quick show of hands to start. Who has been taught object-oriented programming? Nearly everyone. Who is doing object-oriented programming? Nearly everyone. That's something else. Okay, who is using Spring and or Java EE? Okay, you cannot raise your hand. If you are doing Spring and Java EE, you cannot raise your hand and state that you are doing object-oriented programming. In this talk, I will try to prove it, and I will try, well, to show you that it can be done properly. That's what I've been taught, or basically that I taught myself. That is an object. And at the center, at the core of the object lies a state, and you cannot access the state. I mean, it's the basics of object-oriented programming. Encapsulation. First thing of object-oriented programming, it's encapsulation. So the state is protected, reading or writing, and you can only access the state through from methods. So only through methods you can access the state. And if two objects needs to communicate with one another, then there is a method calling another method, blah, blah. Okay? Do we agree on that? Great, thanks. Now I can go further. And perhaps you know about this object calisthenics by Jeff Bay. He describes, in this book, he describes the object calisthenics in 9 rules. Very simple rules. I mean, it's like clean code. They are basic rules of object-oriented programming. If you apply them, probably you are doing object-oriented programming. Notice that the last one is no getters and setters. Now, coming back to my previous question, who is doing object-oriented programming? Okay, no getters and setters.
For the most of the time.
Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, you can do it. You can do it. But if you are doing Java EE or Spring, it's very hard to get rid of those getters and setters. Getters and setters, they break encapsulation. They allow you to access the state of an object, regardless of the fact that it's private. It's like saying, okay, I've put a door, you cannot access it, but here is a key. Anyone can access it. So yes, getters and setters are methods, so semantically speaking, it's right. But in fact, it's crap. If you are using getters and setters, you're breaking encapsulation, you are not doing object-oriented programming. Most of the time, what you are doing is, get something and set something else. You are not using methods. You are using getters and setters. But it's the most important rule, but there are a lot of others, like one level of indentation per method, which means no nested blocks. Only one nested block in a method. Probably, it's also in clean code. You want to break big methods into smaller chunks. So it's not only about object-oriented programming, but clean code in general. But here, these rules say one level of indentation, one level of nesting. Don't use the else keyword. Yeah, because if you have an if-else, probably it should be handled by polymorphism. This one is funny also, wrap all primitives in strings. How many of you use ints, strings, longs? double floats. No, you never use them? So you have this nice entity, and of course there is this field, first name, it's a string, and the field last name is a string. And when you call the constructor, you pass both strings. And you always forget if the first string is the first name, or if it's the last name. I'm not telling you when there is a middle name. Huh? We are not Americans, but so you should have not strings, but you should have entities called first name, entities called last name, so you cannot mix them. It's proper object-oriented programming. First-class collection is the same. You shouldn't have a list of something. You should create a true entity and have a definited semantics on it. One dot per line, again, it's more like clean code. You don't call get.something.get.something.set something. You have one dot, you call one stuff per line. Don't abbreviate, same thing, more like clean code. Probably you don't do it. Keep all entities small. That normally the rule is if you've got three or more than three members, more than three attributes, then probably your entity is too big. I will check some code. Not yours, not mine, but good code. And no classes with two more instances variables, so yeah. Shall we agree on that? It's not my rules, they're rules, but they make sense for you or not? Yeah. One is not convinced. Okay. That's the theorem. That's how they are defined. I'm not making the rules. We can disagree on some stuff, but if you check, they are pretty like factual, and the wrap all primitives and string, they are more like DDD. Well, it's exactly the same stuff that you describe in DDD. You don't have like simple ints and longs and stuff. Every time you have a real entity. So they have been rediscovered, but I don't think it's brand new, this kind of stuff. So you know now, at least if you attended the keynote, you know about the Spring Clinic. I love the Spring Clinic. I mean, because it's very simple codes, and it's quite good code, actually. So let's look at the Spring Pet Clinics codes and check some rules. So here we can see the process creation form. Obviously, does it respect the rules or not? Sorry? Nearly, because there is an if-else. If-else is bad, yeah. But in that case, it's crap, because since there is a return, we can do that. And we respect the rules. Easy, huh? And you can see that there are some others. Let's say this one, for example, has the same problem. There is if return, else if return, so we can also skip that one. That's pretty easy. So it's not because some codes seems to break the rules that they really break it. We can be a bit smarter. However, now I can check this class. I think it breaks at least two rules. The first, it has a date, and date can be date of anything. It can be a birth date, it can be a death date, it can be a date of the visit, it can be anything. The collections are not wrapped, they are just raw collections. And of course, since it's a GPA entity, it has every getter and setter you would like. Pretty crappy. If we take that the rules are a proof of object-oriented. This class is not object-oriented at all. In fact, if every entity you would find breaks this stuff. Here you've got an integer, you've got the accessors, it sucks. And probably, if you are using Spring or Java EE, you are writing this kind of code. Now I ask the question again. Who among you is writing object-oriented code? Nearly one, half one. Okay, that's good. You are in the right room. Now, if we go a bit further, this is what you code. And when I say you, I mean me too. This is what we code. We code in layers. You have the controller layer, you have the data access layer, and in between, you have the service layer, right? Okay, service layer, meaning that's where the business logic is. But isn't the business logic supposed to be in the objects? I mean, isn't that the real difference between a struct in C and a class in Java? The fact that we have logic, we have methods, we have behavior. And still, the only method that we have in general on our entities are getters and setters. And in services, do we have state? No, because we have learned that state is bad. So on one side, we have entities that only have states, and on the other side, we have service which only have behavior. Aren't we supposed to do object-oriented programming? Where is the object orientation in that shit? Where? And it has a name, anemic domain model. You remove all the logic from your entities and you put it into your service. And of course, at some point in time, your service, they cannot handle all the complexity. So you have if-else, nested levels, and it doesn't work anymore. And if you go beyond the simple example, it starts getting very, very complicated. If you worked in some shops with very big application, your services are just like crazy. It's very hard to understand them. If you have no test, you are dead. Okay, you should have test, but shit happens. That's not what I learned about object-oriented programming. So what I created is a very simple application. Very, very simple, and I follow the layer principle. So here I have a Spring Boot application. So this is the application, it has nothing. I have a controller, and because I want to keep it simple, it's a REST controller. And I just want to be able to query my accounts for their amount of money. So I want to list all accounts. I want to list one specific account, and I want to transfer money from one account to another. So I have 3 entry points. And I created that using Spring Boot and the layer architecture. So nothing wrong with that. No? Entity, it's familiar to you, right? And service is here. So the next step is, I want to launch it to prove that I can code as well, not only show codes, but I want to show you how it works. So no, not now, please. So here, I've got 3 accounts. I can list one specific account. I can try to get a wrong account, and here, since the account doesn't exist in the database, it tells me no. And I can transfer money from one account to the other. But I'm super lazy. I'm a good developer, so I'm super lazy. And I didn't check if the IBAN was correct or not correct. You know, the IBAN, there is a rule to check if an IBAN is correct, because there is a control key at the end. So obviously, this account, which this IBAN is not correct. But I have to go to the database to check that. I don't check the format of the IBAN. So I'm spending CPU time just going to the database and telling me, hey, your IBAN is not there, it's a wrong account. So the first thing you have to do in that case is to validate the format. Makes sense. Where do I validate the format? In my architecture. In the service. Makes sense. So I will just do that here. And because I'm super lazy, I will just get the next commit. And here, I have a validate method. I compile it. And now I should have an illegal argument exception. So here it should still work. Yes, and here. Okay, that's good. But now I'm going further this way, and I'm putting everything into the service, and I hate it. Because I'm creating stuff that is wrong, that cannot exist. So what I want to do is to rightfully put the thing where it belongs, and it belongs in an IBAN. Because I told you before, a string is just a string. Using OOP, I shouldn't just handle string. I should use IBANs. Now, it should be good if it refreshes. Now I've got an IBAN. So I create the IBAN, and I should put this validate method not in the service that validates the IBAN, but in the IBAN itself. Now, this should still work, just checking every time. Does it make sense to you? Just starting very slowly. This is an IBAN. This is not a string. So create the abstraction of an IBAN and put the validation inside of it. What would be the next step? Well, I will move everything that I can into this object and start removing stuff from the service. For example, the transfer, I put into the IBAN. The getter, I put it into the IBAN. So from an IBAN, I get an account. Makes sense also, as well. And I remove everything from the account service. Now there is one caveat to that, is that now, at this time, I need to pass the repository, because this is a dumb object, and it should stay as such. This is a dumb object. So every time I pass the repository that I get from the controller. So I inject the repository in the controller instead of the service, and I pass it to the IBAN. I'm still checking that it works. It still works. Are you okay with that? Okay. Let's have a look at the service. What does a service do now? Nothing. And I already know that some of you, in some of your services, you do that. You pass it, doing nothing. Just why? Just because you have been taught that you use layer architecture, even if the service layer is useless. You are writing useless code. That's bad. Sorry? Yeah. Okay, sure. So the next step is to say, this is useless. Remove it. I remove the service altogether. The service is useless. Let it sink inside of you. What you have been taught is all wrong. Okay? What's the next step? Well, that's the worst stuff. What I'm doing now is I'm using Spring, and that you cannot do, or I don't know how to do it with Java EE, let's say it, but I don't think you can do it. I will inject the repository into the entity by load time waiving. So every time I create a new entity, it will have an account repository. So here, when I create a new IBAN, it will get this kind of stuff. I will just restart because I'm not sure I can just compile and make it work. And I'm still checking if it works. So do I get all accounts? Yes. Do I get a single account? Yes. Do I get the wrong account? No. And do I transfer stuff? Yes. That is black magic. But this is object-oriented programming, guys. Now, what's the next step? If I show you this class, what's the problem of this class? I've created the IBAN entity, but here it's still represented as a string. That shouldn't work. That's not good. I should have an IBAN entity here. Well, it's possible. I have to fight off bits against GPA, but I can do it. Because this is also now an embeddable GPA stuff. There is a bit of difference now, however. What's the difference? Now it's a real object. And right now, I'm leaking my representation into the outside world. And I'm breaking perhaps the contract that I made with someone else. Okay, no problems. I mean, it's JSON in the end, so it's Spring Boot as well. Let's have an account serializer. And nobody is none the wiser. So in the database, I have my flat table. in the outside world, I have my flat representation. But now I'm really doing object-oriented programming for the IBAN. Because the account is still not very object-oriented. The account still has that kind of stuff. Not very great. Also, IBAN, here I have to keep, thanks to GPA, I have to keep an empty constructor. I can restrict its visibility, but I still have to keep it because of GPA. The transfer things, it shouldn't be from IBAN to IBAN, but probably from account to account. And you can go on and on and on. If you want to refine your domain model to be object-oriented programming, then you must work further. And because I'm lazy, I stopped at this point. But it's already a lot of work. I think that's the end. No, I removed the set amount. Yeah, something very bad that I left is that you could set an amount on the account. You should never, ever do that. If you are working in the banking industry, you don't set an amount on an account. You transfer money from one account to the other. So setters on money, they should not exist. Because money doesn't get created. It can only get transferred. I think that's the end. So that's what you learn in school or in university or benefits of object-oriented programming. You can reuse code. You have this encapsulation. You map to the business model. That's what you have been taught. But you don't apply it. But you are still convinced that you are doing object-oriented programming. Interesting. Now the problems. The problems is we had to fight against the framework. We had to fight against GPA. We have to fight against our own mindset. So it takes time. It's more complex. We use, I didn't show you, but when I'm launching the application, I have to use load time weaving. I have to use a Java agent. So you can only use one Java agent. If you have like metrics frameworks that check your codes, they will fight against one another. And as I told you, it's not complete. We still have a long way to go. So the question is, and it's up to you to answer. Well, I've got a lot more friends now, thanks. It's up to you to answer this question is, what benefits you the most? Is it to do object-oriented programming or to use layer architecture in your Spring or Java EE application? I cannot answer for you. I cannot answer for you. You have to decide for yourself. But at least, what I try to show you into this simple talk is that you don't do object-oriented programming, so stop pretending you do. Perhaps there is some time for question and answer, or we are already done? There were no girls to tell me that? We are finished. So thank you. They are nice girls, but they didn't give me the time, so it's too late anyway. Okay, thank you for your attention. I am still available to